Abbie.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Abbie Noriega from Bridges to Prosperity. Viz for Social Good has done two projects, and they've been both tremendously exciting. And even just the mission of Bridges to Prosperity is just great. I mean, we all take bridges for granted. We probably walk across them or on roads, but there's so many people in the world who a bridge has changed their entire life and the lives of the community and the family. So it's with my pleasure, I'm going to be introducing Abbie. So please go ahead, Abbie. Take it away.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. Let me get my screen share up. And can everybody see this full screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So first of all, really, really excited to be here. I want everyone to know that the title of this talk today is very much in love. I love how the DataViz community has come together with my community of engineers and infrastructure nerds to create so much incredible viz. And I've said this before, but Viz for Social Good is the single most exciting way I've ever seen a base of volunteers used. I've worked in the nonprofit field my entire life. My entire career, been both an employee, a volunteer, and a board member at several organizations that really rely on volunteers. And I think the convergence of skills, community, new ideas, new perspectives that exist within the Viz for Social Good community is just unlike anything I've ever seen, and is productive in a way that I've never seen. I just really love the way this org leverages volunteers and have grown to really love this community. So what I'm going to talk about today is our organization. So giving an overview for those of you who are not familiar, a bit of an update for those of you who are, and then get into some of the ways that data is important and data viz is important to how we work as an organization, and then some of my favorite examples of how we've worked with Viz for Social Good volunteers in the past. And I'm not sure if we have time for questions at the end, but Vinitha, I'd love for you to holler at me if I'm going over on time, or if you want to make sure to leave some time for questions at the end.
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. I'll try to keep myself in check, but I get excited when I start talking about this. So grateful for help here. So about 80% of people living in extreme poverty throughout the world live in the rural context. And this is sometimes a surprising statistic for people to hear, because so much of poverty alleviation is focused on urban areas, because that's where most of the people live. But in reality, the most vulnerable people are living in the rural context. And for about, we estimate about 1 billion people worldwide, crossings like this make it impossible or difficult or dangerous for people to reach even the most basic critical services on a daily or a weekly basis. Markets, schools, hospitals. We have, at our organization, specifically identified a few thousand of sites just like this. And we estimate that based on those field-based needs assessments, there are probably hundreds of thousands more. So what do you do? How do you address this? We build bridges. And so we build bridges like this that specifically serve pedestrians, bicyclists, motos, animals. We see a lot of cows, goats, chickens, pigs going across bridges like this. And we build these because they are a piece of the infrastructure network that's a discrete piece of infrastructure that has a high return on investment when it comes to impact, right? So if you can cross a bridge or if you can cross a river during the most challenging times of year to travel, you can typically, that changes your ability to reliably access destinations like schools, markets, hospitals, things like that. We specifically work on bridges that look like this, that are pedestrian friendly and not catering to heavy vehicles because they're relatively cheap to build. They require almost no maintenance, and they can be built in the rural context where you may not have access via a truck or via any roads to get there. You can build the entire thing essentially by hand without any equipment, and it's scalable. So replicable and scalable pretty much anywhere in the world. And ultimately, our vision is a world where poverty caused by rural isolation doesn't exist. We believe this is a solvable problem. Rural isolation is a root cause of poverty. Typically, the more remote you are, the more physically remote you are, the poorer you are. And so we believe that we can invest in this on a national, regional, global scale to address rural poverty and hit multiple dimensions of rural poverty with one intervention. So all of those opportunities and interventions that already exist, the schools, the health centers, hospitals, markets, the urban centers, we want to use bridges to amplify the impact of those at scale. I touched on this a bit, but for those of you not familiar, trail bridge is not a commonly used term outside of the rural context, but you're really talking about these light touch, cost-effective, durable bridges that are specifically designed to serve pedestrians and then also light vehicles such as motos, bajaj, tuk-tuks, things like that. So not for cars, but for the 99% of people that travel without heavy vehicles in the rural context. And as I mentioned before, they have a high return on investment. So just in economic terms, we're just talking about, in this particular case, agricultural profits. Trail bridges return 49% of their annual investment. That means if we spent $100,000 on a trail bridge, the community is realizing at least $50,000 or at least $49,000 a year in economic benefit. And with trail bridges built to last at a minimum 30 to 40 years, you're talking about a massive economic benefit for rural communities. Our entire evidence and impact program is based on our theory of change, which draws the connections between the construction of trail bridges and then the ultimate results that we want to see in terms of social impacts: poverty, hunger, health and well-being, education. And part of the challenge of our work that is also an incredible opportunity is that trail bridges are multi-sectoral when you're talking about social impact. So you're not just addressing health, you're not just addressing gender equity, you're not just addressing climate resilience or education. It really is a multidimensional impact, and that's really exciting. That's one of the reasons we believe in it, and we've continued to invest so heavily in trail bridges specifically in terms of infrastructure. But it also means that it's difficult to communicate because we don't fit squarely into many funders or many international development buckets when it comes to interventions, right? And so that is something that is consistently challenging for us to portray and to communicate. Healthcare is a big piece of this. Access to healthcare is critical. You're not going to the hospital or the doctor every day, but when you do, it's really important. So if the river happens to be flooded on a day that you're giving birth, or maybe the only day that vaccinations are available for your baby, that is going to make a huge impact on health and public health on a regional scale. Education is another huge reason why people cross. We've seen improved rural access lead to overall improvements in literacy for women and attendance for girls, and trail bridges specifically leading to immediate jumps in student enrollment and student attendance. So when you have that bridge and you're able to get across on a daily basis, and there's no risk that you might be trapped on the other side or that you might not be able to cross in the first place, you're much more likely to attend school and continue attending school as long as you're able to, or through the end of your academic career in that particular place. We don't have stats available yet because we just finished the study, but our M&E coordinator in Rwanda and Uganda just worked on a study that looked at the specific issues that women and girls face as a result of transport barriers. And one of the anecdotes that we heard over and over again is that girls would drop out and marry much earlier in communities that didn't have a bridge or weren't able to consistently access schools, because girls are not often permitted to cross if there's a risk that the river may be flooded, because of the risk of assault if they're left alone on the other side of the river overnight, for example. And so rather than risk sending their girls to school, families would keep them at home. It's an understandable choice, but it also means that girls fall further and further behind and often enter into young marriages rather than continuing their education. In communities where schools, where bridges were in place and girls could consistently access schools, this was not reported as a problem. And so you can see that it even intersects, all of these have interdimensional and intersecting challenges and opportunities when it comes to transportation access. And economic opportunity is where we see the biggest impact and the most immediate impact. In communities with new trail bridges, we've seen a 75% increase in farm profits. That's massive. Subsistence farming is the way that most people make any sort of income or get resources for their household. Imagine if tomorrow your salary increased by 75%. That's pretty incredible. 60% increase in women entering the labor force, another example of intersectionality here and how gender and transport are so inextricably linked. 36% increase in labor market income and overall increase in household income. We're talking about massive economic gains just as a result of a trail bridge. As I mentioned, we've clocked thousands, about 5,000 barriers worldwide. And based on those, we expect that it's much, much higher than this. So we're not able at this point, I'll talk a little bit about that later, but we're not able at this point to make a global estimate that we feel confident in, but we know it's huge and we are one organization. And at present, we're the only organization addressing this issue on a global scale. So we're very proud of what we've been able to do. At this, to date, more than 500 trail bridges completed. I think it's 503 as of today across 21 countries. I think we actually just crossed 1.8 million people with new safe access. And that's really, really exciting. But frankly, with the scale of the problem, we're not going to be able to make a dent as just one organization working with governments to implement trail bridges, one country at a time. And so we have recently kind of shifted our view of how we can address this problem on a large scale. And so part of that is a more data-driven approach. And part of that is being able to quantify the problem at scale and use the evidence that we have to help people understand what a big problem this is, but also that it's a solvable problem, that it's something worth investing in, that it's not so overwhelming that we shouldn't invest in this to a significant degree. And so our big pivot has been in systems change and scalability around systems change. So while we will always be bridge builders, we will always keep bridge building programs as a laboratory and as a way to stay very close to this work. We are also pivoting to be people who are getting bridges built. right? We want to move from, we sort of got stagnant for a while at 30, 40 bridges a year, not making a dent in the probably hundreds of thousands of bridges that are needed on a global scale. And so how do we do that? We start moving into a systems change approach, where we're working with governments to look at not just what is the barrier in a particular community, but what is the barrier at a national level to make sure that rural roads projects are inclusive of the people that actually live and work in those areas, the people that are growing the food that we eat, the people that are really the backbone of the rural economy. How do we make sure that they are being connected on a regular basis? Both to the economy that's driving, that's underlying the GDP for the entire country, but also just for their basic health, safety, and well-being. And so our new strategic plan involves really three pathways: evidence, advocacy, and technical assistance. So this is not replacing bridge building. This is in addition to the bridge building that we're doing. And so this is what our new systems theory of change looks like. So it's not about, you can kind of see that this would precede the bridge building theory of change. So if we can get bridges built, if we do all of these things to get bridges built, governments and the aid sector will fund those national last mile connectivity programs. And so we've identified these three pillars that are going to be critical to this work that we've been focusing on over the last 5 years. And two of those involve data viz to a pretty significant degree. So first, evidence, that's obvious. What is the evidence that we're collecting that trail bridges are impactful at large scale and can be implemented on a large scale and replicable and sustainable? And so being able to not only collect that evidence, but visualize and help people understand that evidence. Because as I mentioned, it's so complex, right? There are so many different dimensions. How do you communicate this to people without overwhelming them? And the second pillar that has a lot to do with this is advocacy. And so we realized that we couldn't, just sort of sit back and feel comfortable with all the evidence that we've produced, all the great technical assistance resources that we've produced. We need to get out into the world and help people understand that this is something worth investing in, and that it's something that's not only just worth investing in, but you almost can't afford to not invest in it. That if you're serious about solving poverty, that you have to be thinking about rural infrastructure in the way that we're thinking about rural infrastructure with our partner governments and communities. And so data viz is a big piece of that for us. It's complex. It's really complex. My outcome indicator spreadsheet that relates to the work that we do, I think has more than 100 indicators in the library. This is really complicated stuff to be able to communicate. And what we have found is that good data viz nets it down to the things that matter most. And that the Viz for Social Good community has been a big part of helping us net down some of those complex concepts in ways that our stakeholders can understand. And when I say stakeholders, it's pretty broad, but key stakeholders for us are governments. They are government stakeholders and investors like the World Bank, for example, or like private philanthropy, corporate philanthropy. But it's also end users and communities that will ultimately benefit from the work that we're doing. And so how do you communicate these complex concepts in a way that people not only understand, but feel compelled by? And so that's where I want to get into some of my favorites, some of my favorite examples from over the years working with Viz for Social Good. So I want to note here that each one of these is just a snippet of the larger Viz that the volunteer created. And I would encourage all of you to go out and check these out if you haven't seen them before, if you weren't a part of the initiative or the reviews for some of these. They're really cool, really exciting. So I want to get into some of my favorite Vizes overall, and then some of the elements that I think are difficult to communicate and that Viz for Social Good volunteers have done a great job of doing. So we're going to start with Maggie in San Francisco. So one of the things that has been difficult for us to to talk about is the seasonality of bridges. I don't know if you saw some of my photos at the beginning, but you see those flooded rivers, right? That people are trying to get across. Some of them look easy to cross, right? At first glance, you look at them and you think, yeah, that it's not fun, but you could get across that, maybe get wet up to your ankles or your knees, and it wouldn't be a big deal. One of the things that's really challenging to capture and communicate is that rivers in rural areas in low-income nations are have much more variability in flooding, because for the most part, they haven't been dammed. There hasn't been any bank protections put into place. They are wild rivers, wild untouched rivers for the most part, which means that seasonal flooding is a much bigger deal. In your city, wherever you live, you may not notice the variability of flooding in the river, and that's because of all the infrastructure that's been put into place to not make that happen. For people in the rural context, the river may flood suddenly, go from being very easily crossable to something that is deep and moving swiftly within a matter of minutes or hours. And it may stay that way for hours or for weeks. And you can imagine how that affects people's planning and decision making. And so I really liked that this particular viz noted both the dry season and the flood season and how it interacts with all of the things that people are trying to do to make a living on a day-to-day basis. So planning and planting, fertilizing and weaving, harvesting, selling and storage. If you are harvesting your crops and then you're not able to get them across the river, they're going to rot, right? And so one of the things that we have found is that with a bridge, people grow more because they know that they're going to be able to, if they invest more in farming up front, they know they're going to be able to reliably get those crops across the river to sell them. Before that, if there was a flood, there was a big risk that they invested all this money into planting and all this effort into planting, and they weren't actually able to reliably get them to market to sell. Priya and Mumbai. I really liked this one because it tells a story about the Rural Access Index, which is really the only well-known indicator that's related to rural transport. And the Rural Access Indicator is a World Bank indicator that looks at how many people have access to an all-weather road within 2 kilometers. And so I really liked being able to show the impact that B2P had in Rwanda over a fairly short period of time, and the influence that has had on the Rural Access Index over time. We had an initiative, the last initiative that we worked on with Viz for Social Good was around policy briefs. So tackling some of these big complex issues in a way that is hopefully digestible and organized for key stakeholders that are in transport policy and planning. And so there are some things that I think are quite obvious when it comes to rural transport. Climate and environment, obviously a big issue with climate change and river flooding. Agriculture, obviously a big issue if we're serving mostly rural farmers. But then feeder roads. How does the work that we're doing connect with the major work that the World Bank has been doing, for example, to invest in feeder roads throughout sub-Saharan Africa? The rural-urban nexus and urbanization. So lots of people are moving to cities because the rural economies just aren't able to sustain them, and there's a big shift in that connect, in both the physical connect and the cultural connect. How does rural access connect to that when it comes to trail infrastructure? So not just these big roads that they're investing in, but low volume roads that actually support the majority of people that live in those spaces. And so I encourage you to check the whole thing out, but you can click into each one of these and see additional details. And it's just it flows in many different ways. It's really easy to navigate, and then I think presents the information in a really simple and easy to digest way, and also brings in some stories and some human elements to it. And I really appreciated that. We've got Martina in Italy. This was really just one of multiple pages that looked at our catchment surveys, which looked at the geographic distribution of impact. So when people are crossing our bridges, what are their origins, what are their destinations, and what are they doing? And so this looks at 6 different bridges. And I really liked this. Our CEO, Nidhi Sharma, she often, when talking about our work, like to contextualize how big the data equity gap is by noting that in places like LA, New York, you can jump on Google Maps and you can even see cracks in the sidewalk. That's how detailed the spatial data is. There are most of the villages in the places where we work aren't even represented with a dot on a map. And so I really loved this representation that wasn't in a traditional map form, but shows the travel that people do and shows the volume of travel between specific villages and across a particular bridge. I thought it was a really beautiful way to show something that is really never represented. And here, I'll give you a little bit of a deeper look here. But each one of those dots that you see there, those are villages and the connections between them and people that are traveling. And this was one of the more exciting ones that I came across, I think, because it was so unusual, but also did such a good job of communicating our work and the importance of that work. And I think I saw that Dennis is on the call, but from that same project, we had his mission, which allowed you to actually build your own policy brief. So like I mentioned, it was 4 complex issues with a lot of complex statistics related to it. This is on Tableau Public. I encourage you to get in there and play around using all of these variables that he presented here. You can actually go in and build a policy brief that's tailored to whatever specific issue you want to share about. And so this has been cool for both our staff and some of our close stakeholders in helping to describe our work. And the interactive element, I think, was just something particularly cool that I had not seen in data viz in quite this way. And then finally, I really love the use of photos. So some of the gorgeous photos that our volunteer photographers have taken for us over the years, I've just been so impressed with how the Viz for Social community, the Viz for Social Good community has integrated those into the work so that data viz comes alive with the human element, because ultimately what we're talking about here is creating a better world for humans that live in rural areas. And so like Sarah in Toronto, Nicholas in Paris are just 2 of the many examples of how people have used visual elements beyond data viz and design to show the impact of this work and the importance of this work. I think there are literally, there's over 100, dozens for sure, examples of how the Viz for Social Good community has come together. Not just on Tableau Public, there are many other examples that I think are available through the Viz for Social Good website. But I encourage you to go and explore those, take a look. Please appreciate what people have been able to help us do as we embark on this journey to solve the problem of rural isolation in our lifetime. And then finally, just one little sneak preview that I wanted to give to this community in particular. We have been working for a couple of years on a tool called FeecaMap, and it's actually a tool suite. And so we have been able to level up the work that we do and the partners that we work with over the past couple of years, in part due to the evidence that we've been able to build, the advocacy, the Viz for Social Good elements or products that we've been able to pull from. And that's helped us build products like FeecaMap. So you can go to feecamap.com and see a preview of what this is. Essentially, it's a way for us to do 3 things. Quantify the need for trail bridges, and later on, we hope to also include other transportation barriers in a particular country. estimate the impact of that, and then also estimate the cost of that. And so you can imagine a tool like this would allow us to work with governments and other funders to plan long-term infrastructure at scale. This is something that people don't think about very often. So being able to not only draw attention to it, but provide support in this particular way is really important to us, and is already changing the game in terms of our ability to scale. We are the most number of bridges I think we had built in a given year was around 40 before this past year, and it was 87. We're looking at it probably being about 150 in the next year. So you can see that our strategies for scale are actually moving because of tools like this. So the strategy is working, and thank you all for your part in that. So ficamap.com is live, and that gives you some previews of what we're trying to do. Map.ficamap.com is the actual app. It is live. We haven't advertised it at all. It's not even linked from ficamap.com because we just launched it to a small group of users, of internal users, essentially, and internal stakeholders. What I would love to invite you all to do is visit map.ficamap.com and give us feedback on this tool. I think that this particular group is a great community to start gathering early feedback from as we work to develop this map. FICAMAP is a remote sensing and impact modeling tool, but DataViz is a big part of it. So while we want this to be useful, we also want it to be beautiful and easy to understand. And I can't think of a better group of people to help us make it better. So some references for what I shared today, a little bit about us if this is your first interaction with B2P and you want to learn more, and please feel free to reach out with any questions. I'm always happy to. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Wow, thank you so much, Abbie. That was incredible. I had forgotten about some of those vizzes, and I always fascinated project after project. It's the exact same data set, and what the volunteers come up with are just so unique and different. So yeah, thank you for sharing back the work that we've done and the impact that we've had. Just seeing, was there any questions in the audience? Okay, I don't think, but yeah, and we hope to collaborate with you again. I'm definitely going to check out the FICA map, and we'll promote that within our community so you can get some feedback as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me be a part of this, and good luck with the rest of your summit. I can't wait to see what's next for VSG.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Bye. Okay. All right. That was very inspiring. All right. So on to our next agenda item. Oh, let me just stop the recording.